Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective. Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Peter Fenger, and returning to our show today is my guest, John Morgan. John is a social worker, filmmaker, and founder of Softwork, a men's mental health support network dedicated to helping men, particularly Black men, embrace vulnerability as a pathway to healing, connection, and emotional growth. With over a decade of experience in community mental health, including work in Akron's public schools and the country's first Black-owned, nationally accredited mental health agency, John brings a deeply informed, practice-driven approach to group-based healing. Alongside his clinical work, John is also the co-founder of LYP Media, a storytelling platform that uses film to explore issues at the intersection of wellness, equality, and social justice. Through powerful visual narratives focused on Black maternal health, incarceration, and men's mental health, his filmmaking extends the mission of Softwork, challenging stigma, applying lived experience, and creating space for collective healing. I'm excited to have John back with me today as part of our clinician series, where we take listeners behind the proverbial therapy door to explore strategies and techniques that support men's mental health. In our episode today, we'll explore the philosophy and practice behind Softwork, looking at how group-based support for men is thoughtfully designed, facilitated, and sustained, from building trust and navigating challenges to recognizing deeper needs and fostering long-term healing. John, so excited to have you back. Welcome.
Thank you, Peter. I'm glad to be here, man.
Yeah, likewise. I so appreciated our last conversation and really just the heart that you have in this work. From our previous show, you really did a nice narrative of that journey and really the intentions that you set into not only just live your purpose in the films that you've done, but also the intention behind Softwork. So I'm really excited to really kind of dive deeper into this work of running men's mental health group.
Yeah, for sure.
So just to start us off, and I know a few of our listeners can be new or need a refresher, so just remind us, what is Softwork and what was that need you were looking to address?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again. Thank you for that. So Softwork is a 501c3, or we're a nonprofit organization here based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we specifically provide resources and support for men's mental health services, right? My education background is in the field of mental health, specifically in the field of social work. I did a lot of work on the front lines and on an everyday kind of capacity in that field for many years. That's how I showed up again in professional settings. And maybe over like the last maybe like 6 years, 5 to 6 years, I really kind of dove deep into the world of entrepreneurship and in business. And one of the things that was really on my heart was like, all right, how do we kind of bridge the gap between the world of what we're doing here in the entrepreneur and business side on storytelling, with filmmaking, and continue to push this line of mental health work, right? And out of that was birth soft work, right? But in that journey as well, on the personal side of things, I had been avoiding the work of doing things specifically for men, right? You know what I mean? I'm talking about just like explicitly for men. I was comfortable with showing up and providing services for groups of for families, for individuals, couples, whatever the case may be, children.
Hmm.
But when it related to just kind of providing those services for men, I was a little reluctant to that. I was very reluctant to that. You know what I mean? And I knew that this next season of life, that I had to be much more intentional, and I had to just kind of face that fear of showing up and doing this way, because not only in my personal life and my personal relationships, but across the board professionally, and these conversations that I was starting to have, yo, men really need these services, right? Men really need a lot of support. Men really need a lot of curated spaces to just be able to exhale, right? And so again, that form software will be hold our flagship program, which is an 8-week program. We go over a variety of different topics, what I like to call the software principles, week by week. And we meet in collective spaces. We do it virtually, we do it in person. We have a really good time. A lot of the men who join, they really, after maybe like the first 2 or 3 weeks, they lean into the space and really make it their own, man. So it's
Hmm.
it's become a really cool organization, and like really mission led program that I really enjoy, and I'm glad to see, a lot of people getting a lot of value out of it.
Yeah, no, one, it sounds great, but it's really interesting that you talk about how you were recognizing maybe a resistance to
Mhm,
opening up to other men or other male clients.
mhm.
And it's interesting as you talk about that, I recognize that there's just like a lot of societal pressure around men to act a certain way or conduct, and we don't have that outlet. And you've recognized that and really leaned into it by providing soft work and
Yep.
creating this safe space for men to be a little bit more vulnerable, lean into some of the emotional stuff that can be very difficult for us because we're taught differently,
Mhm,
right? And
mhm.
and I'm kind of curious because I know that this work can show up in a couple different ways, but you were very intentional about it being group based.
Mhm, mhm.
Why?
Yeah, men for a variety of different reasons, but I think the number one reason was because men, we need to see each other in the spaces, right? We need to be able, it becomes real when we know that we're not alone, right?
Mm,
It becomes real, it becomes obtainable when we can see somebody else share the same type of experiences that we share, right? When somebody else brings to the light the things that we're carrying in the dark, it allows us to humanize ourselves,
mm,
humanize other people. It allows us to give grace to ourselves, give grace to other people. And it allows us to really be seen. And finally we can kind of take that mask off, right? And the groups really allow that to be done in a really safe and high level way, right? You know what I mean? We do it with care, right? You know what I mean? And the thing about it is that when you get men in spaces that are safe and give them the tools and the language, more times than not, we pour it out, right? You know what I
mm,
mean? And a lot of men are really struggling. A lot of us are struggling with maintaining ideologies and these belief systems and this box of what manhood has looked like for so many people. And the truth of the matter is, it's not working, right? And I've seen this, and you see it across demos, right? It's not
mm,
just black and brown men, it's white men, it's not just heterosexual men, right? It's a group of us who are all struggling because of this framework of what society has told us. Yo, function out of this and you'll get success, you'll get this incentive, you'll get this carrot. But
right.
behind closed doors, everybody is struggling.
Mm.
Everybody is struggling.
Yeah. Yeah, I sort of see that in our society now where we are searching for some leadership and there's not a lot of good role models right now. And it really kind of asks us to dial back into our community to see the real heart of our humanity, of even just our nation, right? To
Yep.
see that there can be some good leadership that might not be broadcasted. And so, being able to have that space, I could see why a lot of men are running to this, right? Are trying to engage because this is actually giving them some purpose and meaning behind, some very false looking leadership we see sometimes.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, 100%. So I'm just glad and grateful and I'm just proud of myself really to kind of be a part of the moment. You know what I mean? I,
Yeah.
I I recognize the privilege that it is to be alive in this time period, right? You know what I mean? When my father and my grandfather were 37 years old, they were not forced, they were not, given the same opportunity to be able to heal in a collective space, right? Or heal at all, right? They weren't given that, so
Yeah.
I'm appreciative to be in this moment, right? When the tides are changing, right? And hopefully be on the right side of history, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about the actual group work itself. And when
Yeah.
you're welcoming new members, what does the onboarding process look like? How do you set expectations around vulnerability, confidentiality? Talk to me a
Yeah.
little bit about that.
Yeah. So we do that in a few different phases, right? So
Hmm.
a lot of the marketing and the campaigning is typically done through social media, right?
Hmm.
Typically, what happens is we've seen our members and our group participants come in from a few different ways. The number one person who typically comes to our group, they are referred to the group by their partner, right?
Mm.
And that could be a wife, a girlfriend, significant other, whatever the case may be, right? That person is knowing that their partner, the person that they're in relationship with, is behind doors. They may be struggling, and they may have even voiced like, "Hey, I'm looking for something, but I don't know what to do." And more times than not, their partner has presented them this opportunity. Like, hey, this looks cool. This looks like something that you could be a part of. This guy, it looks pretty credible. It looks good. Why don't you check it out, right? And a lot of our participants, a lot of our members have come in through referral process through their significant others and their partners, which we love that, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we recognize that doing this work is not individualistic, right? It allows us to heal again in community, right? It allows us to heal collectively. You know what I mean? When men heal, that really transforms an entire family generation, right? You know what I mean? So we love that.
Yes.
And the other portion of that, again, just kind of going hard through social media and pumping everything through social media. When we get men to join, then that word begins to spread through word of mouth, right? And so that's our onboarding process, right? That's how we get eyeballs on what we do, right? And I have a one again, we're a 501c3, so I have a wonderful board of directors who share within their networks as well. And we just kind of get the message out, right? We have people behind us who know the value of this work, right? So we kind of push it through social media and also have people share it on the verge of word of mouth. And so the way that we curate the spaces is that we have these community guidelines, right? So the first one is confidential, right? We always kind of set the stage that this is a confidential, safe space that you can be yourself, right? We want to continue to lean into this to the stance of like we can drop the performance when you come in here, right? You know what I mean. So we always lead with the confidentiality piece because a lot of times men are sharing stuff that they have never shared with anybody, right? You know what I mean. So that's the first one. The next thing that we always put down in our community guidelines is give men the freedom to be able to pass, right? You're never forced to share, right? We want to be able to set the stage for you that when you are comfortable, when you are feeling, led to share, please do so. But if it's not on you, feel free to pass. A lot of times we do like our virtual groups have really taken off. Our virtual groups are really, really good. So another thing that I try to ask men to do is try to be present on the screen, right? We're already in a highly technology driven society, right? And especially post COVID, it's easy for us to lean into the gadgets and the technology because it does give us a little bit of safety, right? It
Hmm.
provides a certain level of lack of transparency and a lack of vulnerability, by being behind the screen a little bit, right? It's different when you're when you're sharing space. So I asked men to be able to be on the screen just to be able to provide a certain level of integrity and a certain level of buy-in, right? That we're all sharing. The next one is that we said one of our more important guidelines, which is that again, we want to continue to hammer on this is a safe space, right? So we always tell men to when they do want to share, because it's a collective space as well. I'm the lead. I'm a lead in here, but this is a collective space. So when we do have stuff that we want to share, if somebody says something that you want to respond to, try to respond from the I perspective, right? It allows other group members and participants to not feel judged, right? Because again, guys are coming in here sharing stuff that they've never shared before, right? So
Right.
those are the guidelines that we have to kind of like it sets the foundation that okay, we're safe, we all have the same level of buy-in, and there is some credibility here that this guy is providing that allows us to say, okay, you know what, this is different. You know what I mean? This is not just linking up and we're just talking about what's on our heart, right? This is a curated, space that's different that a lot of men have never had the opportunity to join. So we do that in the framework of setting those community guidelines. And again, week to week we go over what I like to call the software principles.
Yeah. Yeah, those are so good. Transparency is I also facilitate my own group. Not necessarily men's group, it's an anxiety group, but I too abide by those principles and try to create that welcoming space.
Mhm.
And it is so helpful and positive to be able to have that safe space for folks to kind of walk in and feel safe and get vulnerable. Even just being able to listen can be so helpful of just bringing up stuff that you might not be aware of. I think it just creates that really collective healing space that we're all kind of in this together. It's all an individual journey, and we can all take sort of accountability for it, but we're also showing up for others. And I just think that, having those set of rules is really the foundation for a psychologically safe space for everybody.
And I think men appreciate that, right? People appreciate that, right? Even children appreciate structure, right? You know what I mean? Everybody
Yes.
appreciates structure, but the other caveat in that is always care, right? I emphasize
Yes.
the importance of like, you are going to be handled with gentleness and care and appreciation and love and kindness while we're here, right? This isn't a productivity led group, right? This is handled with care and with love. You know what I mean? So those
Mhm.
things work in unison and work together for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I know in my experience, having gone through both virtual support groups as well as in person, I find that smaller groups tend to click a little bit better. There's a
Mhm.
little bit more synergy. And I
Yep.
know that you are very intentional about your participants.
Yes.
On the last episode, you talked about 10 participants.
Mhm.
Talk to me about why that number is important and how does that impact the safety and connection?
Yeah. I mean, you just said it, Peter. Right? The smaller numbers allows for the intimacy to continue to like it's evident, it's prevalent, right? When there's
Yes.
anything more than 10, somebody's going to feel left out. And even 10 can be a high number, right? But we cap
Hmm.
it at 10 because it allows people to feel like they're a part of it. It
Yes.
allows people to feel like they can do it collectively, and it
Mhm.
it gives us enough people to be able to pair up if need be, right? You know what I mean?
Yes.
it
Yes.
it becomes a team, right? Again,
Hmm.
I may be the lead facilitator, but this is very much a collective space. It's a place built on reciprocity, and anything over the 10, it just muddies the waters a little bit. That doesn't
Yes.
allow us to do that, man. You know what I mean? So we really want to hammer in on the intimacy, the transparency, the care, and it being a reciprocal synergy led space.
Yes. Yeah, one of the things that I so enjoy about some of our smaller groups is that I find that members show up for each other and there's a growing of knowing each other,
Mhm.
right? And as we sort of walk through these, and certain topics will kind of ebb and flow, I feel like having that understanding or even just knowing that this person is sharing, it makes it a little bit of a safer space for me to share.
Yes.
And the engagement tends to be a little bit more self-serving. I
Yep.
find that the group itself is able to sort of coach itself,
Bingo.
if you will. And I think that to me is a real sign of trust.
Mhm, mhm.
So
Uh,
talk to me a little bit about how you establish some trust in your groups and really kind of encourage folks to share. Because I know some of these things happen organically, but is there some intentionality that you use or any strategies that you use?
so I love the example and the language you just used there, right? Of like, when you set the stage for it, the team can kind of coach themselves, right? My prior to education, prior to entrepreneurship, I was an athlete first. I played sports. So a lot of those same principles that have really helped me in life, I try to apply them when they're appropriate in the world of what we do here in mental health, right?
Right.
And some of your best coaches out there will tell you that the teams that succeed and the teams that win are the teams who care and love each other, right?
Mm.
And as the coach, you can just kind of come in and provide a little bit of strategy, and you can kind of manage when need be. But the teams who really succeed, they already know what the mission is, right? And so day one, I'm very, very intentional on utilizing the language of saying, hey, I'm the facilitator, I'm the lead in here, but this is our space, right? You know what I mean? This is
Yes.
yours. You know what I mean? You chose to be here. You chose to invest your time, your resources, your energy, your sharing your stories. This is ours, right? This is
Mhm.
something that we are co-creating together. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And again, when you put that ownership back on people, it allows them to feel not only like they're a part of it, but that they have some level of responsibility in that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, you can just feel that differently. You know what I mean? And trust me, I've had groups where it has not always been that way. I've had some groups where guys are a little bit more distant, a little bit more reluctant, you know what I mean? Where is my current that work I actually just had last night, it's probably been my most synergy led group where, you know, the first 10 minutes as we were waiting for one of our last participants to join, the first 10 minutes, all the group was just having conversation with each other, talking about college football, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And,
Great.
and it was just a very much free flowing conversation that really points to, okay, these guys trust each other. There's some real genuine love there. And guys are starting to form real relationships with guys they didn't even know 4 or 5 weeks prior, right?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Just by being in this space of sharing, there's a certain level of just like synergy and there's a certain level of mutual respect and understanding because we're all invested in this thing together.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that term you're using of mutual respect.
Mhm.
Again, when we're put in vulnerable spaces, right, there is a level of trust that you hope to receive, a level of validation. And so when we're able to craft, these safe spaces, and when there's a degree of knowing,
Mhm.
I just think things sort of unravel in really healthy ways.
Mhm.
One of the really interesting things that I find about my groups is that oftentimes there'll be something that somebody else says where awareness will just sort of kick up in myself.
Mhm.
And I love that aspect of sort of this community healing because oftentimes we mirror for each other, right? And being able to engage in those spaces and really have that degree of vulnerability where people can kind of dig a little bit deeper, I think it
Yeah.
really kind of gets to some elements that, might just be hidden to us or just slowly arising. I just think it creates a really safe healing space.
Yeah, 100%. And to that point, and to the question that you just asked me, the other part that I forgot to mention in this that really lends to what makes the group, the sacred thing that people can get into is authenticity on
Yes.
our end, right? And it's transparency on my end, right? You know, what I mean? From week
Mhm.
one, I come in and I tell my story on like how soft work was founded to me, right? My own journey to soft work, right? You know what I mean? Again,
Yeah.
I was reluctant to get into this work in this capacity, right? I was reluctant to even call this work soft work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was really hell bent on like, you know what? I can't share this with the world. You know what I mean? I can't
Mhm.
tell people this deep dark secret of like, oh man, I'm soft, right? I got this soft side of me that is I've been trying to mask and shield from the world. I can't show people that, you know what I mean? But through this work, by leading with my own story and leading and telling men that, listen, this has been my walk, I am sensitive, right? I am highly connected to my emotions. I am welcoming to my fullness as a human, right? I'm not shying away from my full humanity. I am looking to break a lot of the outdated ideologies that I was raised with, right? You know what I mean? I
Mhm.
am looking to resist those things, you know what I mean? And that allows me to say, damn, I knew somebody else felt the same way that I did. I just I needed somebody else to say it so I could hear it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It allows guys to be able to say, man, I knew I wasn't the only one. You know what I mean? So that's
Mhm.
that's a big part of it too, just being authentic and just telling my own story too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's really in those spaces, there's that ebb and flow of leadership that I
Mhm.
love so much. You're talking about when somebody else is there to provide the example, somebody else is there to receive it. And oftentimes, like those reins are released and somebody else takes the lead and you're following. And I
Yep.
love that about groups. And there is like that mutual respect and that community healing that's just so helpful in sort of these spaces. I want to ask you, as you're working with men, particularly Black men,
Mhm.
what are some of the common challenges or resistances that you're finding men kind of bringing into this space?
I think that the number one thing is, and again, a lot of my participants tend to be black men, but I've had white men join the spaces too. I've been in healing spaces with white men too, right? And the number one common denominator that I see is that men do not have we have not been given the space and the opportunity to say one thing. And that one thing is to be able to say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing.
Mm.
Right? You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Just to be able to verbalize and say, I don't know what the fuck that I'm doing. I'm actually winging it. right?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? I'm trying my best and it's still feeling like it's not working. That that in itself translates. I mean, again, that goes across all demos, right? And giving men the space to be able to say that, you can see the weight release off of everybody when they're given the opportunity to just say, man, I really don't know what I'm doing. And I don't know if that makes me crazy or not, or I don't know if that makes me less than. I feel like I should have it all figured out at 30 plus. I'm 40. Here I am, 40 years old, and I still don't know what to do. I got kids,
Right.
I got wife and the kids, and I still don't know what to do. You know, and I'm having problems with my teenager, and I don't know what to tell him because I don't know what to do. You know what I mean? And I think that giving the men the opportunity to say, number one, to be able to say that they don't know and understand that there's nothing wrong with that. There is no
Yes.
answer
Yep.
to life, right? You know what I mean? It's perfectly fine and okay, and it's understandable, and it actually makes you extremely wise to say, you know what, I don't know, right? You know what I mean?
Yes.
And as men, man, we've been lied to, right? We've been lied and told this fairy tale story that at a certain point in time you're supposed to have it all figured out. And if you don't have it figured out, figure it out, right? As if there's this ongoing quest for this answer. You know what I mean? When the truth of the matter is, it just don't work like that.
Yeah, there is so much power in just kind of recognizing that we might be stuck.
Man, hundred
And
percent.
and that it's a safe space to start there.
Yep.
Even just calling to the room like, man, it's a really tough situation. We're really stuck right now. Can just You just feel the air kind of let out in the room and everyone kind of like sighs and settles in like, yeah, I'm feeling exactly that right now. One of the things I'm trying to do better about myself is really this relationship of imposter syndrome, right?
Mhm,
And I know everybody goes through that, and we're feeling it in the support groups, but everybody at some point starts there,
mhm.
right? And I think even just the power of acknowledging it and maybe just building from it, even just recognizing that space, feeling uncomfortable and getting comfortable with that uncomfort it can be a fantastic place to just start.
Yep. Yep. And again, it's like for myself, right? I know that one of my biggest, for lack of better words, hurdles are just like, the thorn in my side, the wound that continues to show up for me is this state of worthiness, right? You know what I mean? Which
Mm,
shows up in a lot of times in that imposter syndrome, right?
yep.
Do I really believe that I'm worthy of the things that I feel that God and Spirit has given me to go out there and do, right? Do I really feel worthy of that stuff, right? And and a lot of times, again, calling back to what we said at the beginning of the episode, right? A lot of the things that I have to continue to reshape for me within the story and the narrative, right? Because again, in imposter syndrome, it's telling yourself this story that doesn't even exist, right? You know
Mhm.
what I mean? And so
Yep.
for me, it's reframing the story. And one of the ways that I'm able to do that is putting my feet on that ground and like being in the present moment and saying, wait a minute, I got everything I need. I prayed for this at one point in time. You know what I mean? My bills are paid. My kids are fine. My kids don't hate me. My wife loves me. You know what I mean? I kind of get into the gratitude bag. I got really good physical health. I got breath in my body. You know what I mean? I was able to go to the gym today. I was able to get some filter water out my refrigerator. You know what I mean? I was able to, put my feet in the grass outside in this beautiful North Carolina weather, right? You know what I mean? I was able to see my family for the holiday. You know what I mean? I got really good so I began to kind of like tell myself these stories and it slowly but surely it eradicates the thing of like, how could I not be worthy of the things that I'm after when I got everything I need right here and I got everything I always wanted right here in front of me? You know
Right.
what I mean? And to me, that's been the walk with myself. And I see other men who struggle with imposter syndrome. It's just re-shifting that narrative and that story, that we telling ourselves constantly in our heads.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Whether you're a longtime or first time listener to Behavioral Health Today, you're probably familiar with Triad, the company that brings you this podcast. But you may not know that Triad also hosts a community for current and aspiring behavioral and mental health professionals, featuring trending content and education and career resources, all for free. If you are a behavioral or mental health professional, or you're studying to become one, join more than 80,000 people on Triad by claiming your free professional account today. Visit us at hellotriad.com/BHT. That's hellotriad.com/BHT and join the Triad community today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that exercise of just taking maybe a ounce of gratitude in that moment. It might help you kind of settle in. I know in running these groups, some of the things that go through my head, especially when there's silence, is do I need to be breaking the silence or am I listening enough? And I constantly go through that in my head.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, like, just from your experience, what sort of skills or instincts are essential for running some of these groups?
I think the number one in regards to that is like you got to be able to lean on a sort of authenticity and transparency from yourself, right? You know what I
Mm,
mean? Got to be the one to you got to lean in to break the silence. You got to be a mixture of like a comic, a clinician, a brother, a friend. You got to be the person who's going to say, you know what, I'm going to dive on this grenade first. Like, you know what I mean? I'm going to put myself
mhm,
out there first. And you'll see the air get let out the room, specifically as it relates to men, right?
mm,
In my experience, men really appreciate when they can see someone else with integrity doing the things that that you're preaching about. You know what I mean? Nobody wants to be in space with somebody that is contradictory or somebody who's preaching but they ain't living what they talking about, right? And sometimes I think that's the number one. And sometimes I think it's okay to just be in the silence too. You know what I mean?
yes.
I think that it's okay to say, you know what? We'll just go slow here. We'll take our time. Whatever comes up and who's ever ready, we'll do that when the time is ready. You know what I mean? And just be able to
Mm,
kind of sit in that discomfort. Because there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of goodness that happens in that quietness too. A lot of times, man, we already in a overly noisy society anyway, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like everybody's talking. You know what I mean? Everybody's making noise. You know what I mean? There's a lot of good that happens with silence too, and
mm,
it's okay to just sit in it for a little bit. You know what I mean?
yeah. Yeah. Do you find that online groups might sit in that silence a little bit more than in person? I know in my experience, online tends to be a little bit more anonymous. There may be even just more members than in person, just because it takes a little bit more to show up in person. And so you have these groups where they're online, there might be multiple people. Online's not always a great environment. Folks are talking on top of each other. But I also find like when there's an opportunity to share, and there's a question for the group, that the online community just takes a little bit longer to open up and get being a little bit more vulnerable.
That's really an interesting question, right? Yeah, I was thinking about that as you posed that question. That's really interesting. I think in my experience, I see it play out in this way, right? I think that so it's layered, right? It's nuanced. I think
Yeah.
that in person people tend to lean more into the silence, right? There's this uncomfortable energy of just like we're being in the room with somebody. There's this level of like vulnerability that it's hard to escape, right? You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And I think that scares people. So I think in person, people tend to be more quiet in person because of that. Like it's easier to look foolish. It's easier to see people's facial expression when you're saying something. It's easier to kind of be in your head when you're in person. So I think in person, people tend to be more silent. Whereas digitally, I think it's harder to get people to be transparent and vulnerable digitally.
Mm.
I think that there's still a buffer that allows people to be protected by being on these screens. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas when you're in the ring, you can feel someone's mood. You can
Mhm.
feel, and there's a thing of like, when the heaviness is in the room, right? You can feel when the mood shifts in the room. And you can feel some of that digitally as well. That
Yeah.
depends on the topic of conversation, but you can't escape it in person. You know what I mean? Listen,
Yeah.
digitally, hey, somebody can turn that screen off and walk away if need be, right? You know what I mean? And,
Right.
and they can do it in a way where hey, I had to take a phone, whatever. It's just a different buffer, right? But I do
Yeah.
think that your question is, I do think that it's interesting, right? I think that
Yeah.
I think that it could be posed in both ways, but in my experience, is nuanced in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. If I'm running an online group, one of the things I can ask the group is if they can be intentional about their environment.
Yep.
When we go to an on-site support group, we're intentionally going, there's a room, we try to make it very private. You can open up to good conversations, right? When people
Mhm.
are attending digitally, you might be in the same room as the person you might want to talk about, right?
Exactly.
And that just creates a different environment. So if anybody has the opportunity to kind of give themselves a private space
Yeah.
where they don't feel judged by maybe other people in the room, that's really conducive to the vulnerability piece and really opening up. Although it's very powerful to hear other stories and just listen, I think that's also welcomed in those spaces. But when we try to run a group and try to get participation, I try to be mindful of people's spaces. So give me a sense of your groups. I know you talked a little bit about how you have a sort of a foundation or a frame of 8 weeks,
Mhm.
but tell me a little bit about what a normal session looks like.
Yeah.
Are you welcoming people? There's time to socialize. What does it look like?
Yeah, so I'll kind of break it down. So we hold 90-minute sessions for each group. We always start with breath work, right? We always start with breath work. We start in the same way. We start in with breath work, and that allows us to ease that initial anxiety just kind of coming into the gate, right?
Yes.
It allows men to settle in, and it allows men to connect with our bodies, right? We're constantly up here, we're constantly in our head, we're constantly in our thoughts. We're again, for a lot of systemic reasons, for a lot of the societal ideas, men have been disconnected from their bodies, right? So
Yes.
that breath work allows us to settle in and be connected to our bodies and connected to the tension that we may feel, right? You know what I mean? So that's the first way that we start off. And from there we just kind of get into an introduction. And that can look different. I have men go around and share their name. What's a word to describe how you feeling for the week? What's a high and a low maybe, that you may be feeling? And again, it just kind of gives us an inward look into, where that individual may be feeling, where
Yeah.
they are, where they are currently in that season, right? It allows us to know how to, again, to treat that man with care, right? How if somebody's had a really tough week, we're going to be mindful of that, right? You know what I mean? If somebody's having a really positive week and they're feeling really, really good, hey man, somebody may lean on that a little bit more. You may see that person, with a little bit more energy in the group, whatever. But again, it just sets the stage to let us know where everyone is, right? Which is
Mhm.
important for me as a facilitator, but it's also important for everybody else as well. And then from there, it just depends, right? So I use media, I use visual. Again, we got a media company, so I use storytelling in different avenues to be able to maybe serve as an icebreaker to jump us off into our discussion question for the day, right?
Mm.
And a lot of times I use short clips in media, things like that. Again, that kind of like it sets the stage what we're going to say, but it's just another reference point of hearing it from somewhere else. And then from there,
Yeah.
we just get into discussion or whatever the topic is, whatever the principle is focused on that day. And it's funny, man, because typically I'll have two discussion questions, but when the group is like really, really flowing and everyone is sharing and we're having one of those moments, we're not getting to that second question, right? You know what I mean? That first question it take up so much time, you know what I mean, that by the time it's time to
Yeah.
close out, and I always try to leave people with hope, right? We always want to leave with a hopeful way to close our group, because again, people are sharing, men are coming in sharing things that they haven't shared, and it can get heavy, right? So
Mhm.
how do we leave the group in an optimistic and a hopeful state of mind, even after being in this place that may be dark, it may be heavy, it may be sensitive, whatever the case may be. And then we'll get into our closing breath, and then we just kind of end with some good words and some mindful affirmations and things like that to end our day.
Man, I absolutely love that structure. And I'm actually going to pull a couple ideas from my own groups. But, you know, being able to settle in to your bodies, getting a sense of where everybody's at in the group, I think is just such good knowledge, not only for yourself, but I also think like it helps us connect with our emotions.
Mhm.
Oftentimes we don't really have a good vocabulary with how we're feeling. And so by recognizing or seeing other people kind of come in and talk about how they're feeling, I think it helps build that vocabulary and build that sort of emotional intelligence within ourselves.
Mhm.
You talked a little bit about how things can get a little heavy. Oftentimes there can be conflict or emotional shutdown or tension within the group. How do you navigate those moments?
The number one, another one of the things that I didn't mention in our guidelines, right, is that we don't do emotional saving, right? You know what I mean? We allow the space for men to be able to emote, right? You know what I mean? I think that's one of the more important things to do is that when we see each other, having a hard time or they're discussing something that's really heavy, we don't. I'm trying to really stand on, do not jump in and save this person. Don't save them from the process of emoting. We don't jump in and do like it's all right, man, you're gonna be okay. No, allow allow that person to emote fully, right? You know what I mean? And I think that's the number one thing is giving people the space to be in that and to feel it and to
Feel it.
to welcome it and to not shut it off, right? This is what the space is for. So I think that's the number one thing is that the first part in navigating is not shying away from it. And I think the other part of it is that we have, again, we have resources connected to software where if somebody is in the need of some more intensive services, that's something that we can provide as well, right?
Mhm.
Whether that's one-on-one coaching with me or if they need something a little bit more from a therapeutic lens and something a little bit more treatment plan focused, we have resources connected, where we can get that person some individual therapeutic services as well, right? So we have these guardrails in place for whatever the individual may need. But none of that can happen without giving people the space to just be in wherever they are.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Again, sometimes it is okay for us to kind of be in that space, right?
Mhm.
And let people express themselves fully, right? And not make them feel like feeling a certain emotion is unsafe.
Yep.
I think that that's really important to kind of cultivate in those groups. I want to go back to what you talked about, those guardrails, right? You talked about how sometimes there are folks that need additional resources. One, what do you look for? What sort of signs or patterns are you looking for? And what does that intervention look like?
Mhm, mhm. It so number one pattern, number one thing I look for is a pattern, right? Is this individual coming to the groups? Has it been 2 or 3 weeks? Has it been a multiple weeks, or where this individual has really been struggling, for lack of better words? Have they been in a constant state where it's kind of it's gone over a few weeks, right? How have they shifted from whatever they're talking on in the matter of the group, right? I'm paying attention to all of that, right? I'm paying attention to how this person is working through it. If I see that they may have had a hard time, and by the end of the group, I'll pull them to the side and we'll have some conversations just to kind of be able to assess where they are, right? You know what I mean, and see what it is that they may need. And again, I make myself accessible, for services outside of the group, right? We can always do one-on-one services with myself. And again, if somebody does is that if they're looking for something for a little bit more depth, we can provide that as well, right? But I look for the pattern, and I'll assess that by having some one-on-one conversations with somebody offline, right? Not necessarily in the group. It just depends, and it depends. It's circumstantial, but I always do that by pulling that person to the side, after the group has spent some time with them one on one.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think it takes a group and moments like that to really feel cared for, right? Like you're really approaching that with your heart and again, sometimes, we don't see things in ourselves, and that's sort of the beauty of group work is that we can kind of mirror for each other, right? And we can kind of reach out when we start to see some of those patterns. So again, want to applaud you for being able to recognize some of those patterns. I think that that can be the step for greater healing right? They're already showing up in the group work. There's intention there to do the work on themselves. But
Yep.
sometimes, it takes a little bit extra. Sometimes those one-on-ones to get a little bit deeper. So having those guardrails in place and being intentional about those interventions can really make a difference in lives. Now, I know we talked about your own journey of starting this group healing space. So I want to, try to address some of the other folks that might be looking and hearing this and feeling encouraged to start their own group. What
Yeah.
message or guidance would you offer based on, what you've learned through soft work in really expanding other group work?
I think that everybody has a story. You know what I mean? And everybody's story can serve the greater good and serve the greatest purpose, right? And I think that when you're leaning into your own story, I think that sets the framework for whatever it is you're trying to do, whatever group spaces you're trying to show up to do. And I think that's number one. I think that if somebody has something on their heart and they're looking to share, they want to start their own groups, they want to start their organization, you know, start with yourself. Assess your own story, right? You know what I mean? Again, be the face behind your story. Let somebody, because people a lot of times today, man, people like to buy in, figuratively speaking, people like to buy into you and they want to buy into your story and be authentic and be transparent in that, man. Don't you gotta face that fear like I did, man. Somebody may laugh at you, you know what I mean, for going around and saying that, you soft or whatever. You gonna get some of those some of that negativity that comes with it, but it's way more greater good than that. You know what I mean? So I think that starting with your story cannot be undervalued, and I don't think that that can be looked over. I don't think that that can be you know, mistaken. Like that's not cliche, right? You know what I mean? That's a real big thing, man. Start with your own story. You know what I mean? Like I would love to hear, in starting and doing your anxiety groups, man. Like, I'm sure you have your own personal story, your own personal testimony that allowed you to want to be able to say, you know what, I want to facilitate this because I experienced it, right? You know what I mean? So I think that's the biggest component is leaning into your own story and telling your own story.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And it's leaning into that own story and kind of cultivating what can you pull from that to where you can be in service of others,
Yep.
you know? And the work of working with men, I've heard the expression that if it weren't for sports, men wouldn't high five.
Mhm.
And so being able to have these cultivated spaces where men can really dive into the humanity of themselves and recognize that some of the narratives that we're told about what it means to be a man doesn't serve us anymore and that we can do something different. So, I so appreciate you being able to share your story. But before we go, I do want to ask, where can listeners follow up with you and stay connected, support your mission around soft work, but
Yeah.
also as your work as a filmmaker and live your purpose media?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So first and foremost, man, connect with us at Softwork, www.soft-work.org, right? You can go there and donate there. You can go ahead and get some more information on our services and specifically our 8-week groups. Go to that site. You can follow us on social media at Softwork.org on Instagram. And we're there, right? You know what I mean? We always have information that's going up about our next groups, right? You know what I mean? That information is plastered on the site as well as being plastered on our social media accounts as well, right? We try to have a pretty big, strong presence on social media. And as far as what we do in the storytelling in the multimedia space, yeah, that's called Live Your Purpose, right? And software wouldn't be around without Live Your Purpose. Live Your Purpose was kind of like Live Your Purpose was the groundwork, it was the foundation that allows software to kind of flourish, right? That was my first experience of doing something with the brand and doing create my own brand and creating my own business and creating something that gave me the tools to be able to say, okay, I can do something that provides both service and I can do something that's pretty fun. And we can conduct business in doing it as well. And again, what we just said about the importance of telling stories. Live Your Purpose Media, man, that's a story. That's a storytelling company and media company that we founded back in 2019. It started off as being a podcast, right? And from there, we had some we had the opportunity to come in and tell some stories over like around the pandemic and how small businesses were impacted. And from there, we got another opportunity to tell these collective stories over maternal health and justice work, and people who have been involved within the criminal justice system, and people who have been formerly incarcerated, right? And we've been able to tell these really, really cool stories. We have a story, a field called More Life, that really specifies and talks about the work of Black maternal health and what it takes for women and Black women specifically to be able to get babies born and what it means for them to be born earthside, right? And so we've been able to take that film and we've been able to share that film all over the country, right? This actually last April, we were in the Apollo Theater in New York City. We've been able to share that,
Awesome.
partner with different universities. We actually have created curriculums for those films, specifically with More Life as well. We partner with hospital systems and different organizations as well, where they can actually train their staff and the incoming medical students on this curriculum as well, right? So we've been able to, and we all did that. We did that collectively, but it would have never started without taking that leap into just starting a podcast, which is crazy to me, right? And we did another film called My Life, which it tells the story of an individual named Marcel McDaniel, who was formerly incarcerated for 19 years. And it shows his transition, right? And it shows a lot of the work that he's doing within his field today to help a lot of brothers who are in a lot of positions as him. And it's a mental health story. And we've been able to take that story and that film all over the country as well. We've been able to partner with different universities. Just a few months ago, we did a partnership down here at the UNCC Charlotte with the Black Student Organization. They held a film viewing and they brought us in as guests, and we had a speaking engagement down there with them. We've done things with Georgetown University, University of Michigan, Xavier University, Rutgers University. So all these prestigious organizations and universities around the country, we have a curriculum for that one as well. So we're just finding different cool ways to try to cater the content and put it in these cool, unique ways where people can not only just share the story, but we can maximize the experience around these real cool stories.
Yeah, phenomenal. Again, such a cool experience. And, I so enjoyed hearing about, the ideas behind filmmaking. It was really evident in our last episode about how your heart is in this work. And I see it today in the explanation and some of the intention around soft work. But John, I so appreciate your time today. I really, really enjoy connecting with you in this way. And so look forward to having you back on another episode in the future.
No problem, Peter. Thanks so much, man. I look forward to being with you. Thank you again for having me as a guest, man. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you, our listeners, for taking the time to join us. You can follow us on our social media at Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, and more at Behavioral Health Today. If you like our show, please give us 5 stars and leave us a review. And as always, the resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today. We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.